As Nikki said, I'm Sheila Lamb. I'm a Cloquet City Council member, a member of the MMIW Task Force, a certified sexual assault advocate. I work with trafficked and at-risk youth. I'm a Men 350 co-chair for the board. I work with housing for survivors. So this is kind of what I live and breathe. And as a Indigenous woman and a mother of 3 daughters and a son, these issues also hit close to home for me on a very personal level. And I've also sadly had a couple of my female cousins that were murder victims as well. And one of the things we dealt with so deeply, and I was a co-chair in the systems subcommittee, was the issue of systems. But we have to step back and do a little bit of history before we can even talk about that. And when we're looking at sex trafficking and the murder of Indigenous people, we have to go back to the days of Christopher Columbus, who was the first sex trafficker of Indigenous women and children. And that's where a lot of the genocide began. We also have to look at federal policy, such as our treaties, 500 treaties. Not one treaty has ever been fully satisfied. They have broken every treaty. We are the only population that essentially has a pedigree. So blood quantum, again, is a form of genocide. And that rhetoric has continued on through today. We are disproportionately targeted on many levels, as you've already heard. And part of that is within our educational system. There is no true truth in history taught when it comes to Native people. Our kids in school are not taught consent. They are not taught about sex trafficking and how to protect themselves and how to get help. There's a disconnect within our educational system. Another problem is when we look at how many children are disproportionately removed from their home, whether it's under ICWA or Native children and descendants are put into white homes under child welfare. We see trafficking occur through the welfare system. We have seen murders of infants, toddlers, and children through the welfare system. We need to look at the process of getting foster homes and why this is happening. We need to dig deeper when it comes to children that are chronic runaways. The reporting and how so often, oh, they're just a chronic runaway, and that's kind of pushed off when that's in fact a sign of trafficking or a child potentially being harmed in a foster home. If they're in a wonderful, loving foster home and they're chronically running away, there's a problem. Then we take it to a deeper level, and we have to look at the judicial system. And in light of what we've seen with George Floyd, I think it's pretty obvious to everyone what goes on when it comes to police departments targeting people of color. But it's much more than that. It's also the fact that some of our women, when they are raped, are blamed. We have legislation that is hopefully going to be passed, in which if a woman intentionally was drinking and raped, no charges would be filed. That's re-victimizing a woman who's been victimized by rape. Rape is rape. It shouldn't matter if you're inebriated, if you're using drugs. No means no, but things like that are still on the books. Then you have to look at pieces where police departments are doing deep dive investigations. And I use this as a concrete example because of it happening here in northern Minnesota. Duluth Police Department spent 18 months doing an investigation into 2 different massage parlors, one in Duluth, one in Superior, Wisconsin. At the end of that investigation, a husband and wife who were the owners of these entities were arrested and charged with sex trafficking. However, they were plea bargained down. She got racketeering, he got tax evasion. Superior declined in prosecuting these cases. So we had known sex traffickers out there that were not charged. That is a sign the system is broken. And I've been told by retired police officers that the reason these cases are often plea bargained out is the paperwork and the work involved in prosecuting a case is so great, and there are not enough prosecutors out there that they would prefer to go ahead and make a plea bargain. That's a problem. We look at the judicial system, and I'll use another local example. Jackie Defoe, her toddler son, Kevin Shabayish Jr., and Jackie was pregnant, were murdered in the Fond du Lac region. When this murder occurred and we looked at the information on her partner, the father of her unborn baby, he had a long history of domestic violence, but he was often given a slap on the wrist. And even though he continued to be, someone perpetuating domestic violence, he wasn't being held accountable. So 3 are now dead because of that. We need to look at the judicial system. How are we holding our judges accountable? Are we looking to see if they are frequently giving passes when it comes to domestic violence, when it comes to sex trafficking and those types of things? Because justice is not being served in those issues. There should be something like a 3-strike rule. We hold those that are drunk drivers accountable, whether or not they injure anyone, to a 3-strike rule. But yet someone perpetuating domestic violence against a woman and children, they may get 5 or 6 times where it's, a pass, it's something minor until they finally kill them. And I'm not saying don't get those help. There's, as Mary was saying, there's a lot of trauma within our populations, but we also see that non-Indigenous people, usually white men, are quite often the most significant population that are creating these harms. So being able to prosecute from the tribal level is huge in these issues. When you look at systems, we literally have to start from the bottom up. You've even got to look, as a city council member, I can tell you this firsthand. When I was first running for office, I had teachers and social workers coming to me saying, Sheila, are you aware that we have 4 13-year-old Native girls being sex trafficked here in Cloquet? So once elected, I kind of dug in. It took a while to make it happen. Our police department had one investigator who was our school resource officer, was the only person trained in investigating these cases even. Thankfully, we now have 3. We have partnered with the BCA Sex Trafficking Task Force. So we've changed that. But the majority of our police departments don't even have the ability to dig into these cases and investigate them the fullest way possible, whether it's someone that's missing, someone that's been murdered, or someone that's been trafficked. Another system, as Nicole has already stated, is when it comes to things like autopsy and not listening to people when they're saying, my child, my sister, my brother would not have committed suicide. They did not do drugs, and it's still being written off, or it's being misclassified, or it's not being fully looked into. So every level of our systems, even our education system, when it comes to testing is biased against people of color. So how do we uplift our communities? How do we address these issues when there are biases and misconceptions and ignorance on every single level? So digging into the systems, picking them apart, fine-tuning them, And I cannot stress strongly enough, getting that MMIW office in place to make sure that our 20 mandates are followed through, to make sure that we can fine tune and tweak them and address new issues that arise as we correct certain things. It is so vitally important. And without that piece, essentially our 18 months of work, Senator Kunish's over 2 years of work in this and so forth was for nothing. And it comes across more as lip service. So we've got to get the Senate to wake up and to make this a priority. We have to stop this epidemic of our women and our children being murdered, being trafficked, being abused. And that's the only way that we can truly start to address the trauma of the past as well. You have to stop the trauma that's currently happening. Miigwech.